Good morning. Nice to see you again. What do we know, actually, about what's going on with Sizewell C?
It's very difficult to tell. We had this one briefing, which might just have been a general thing of we're looking at everything with a new Prime Minister, and followed then by Number 10 saying very clearly Sizewell C was still on the cards. But in a sense, the big thing about this is just the uncertainty. When you're talking about an investment of this sort of size, it's been shown that companies will invest in things if they've got certainty, or as much certainty as possible as you can have in an uncertain world. And we saw exactly the same at the beginning of Hinkley C, when Theresa May had just become Prime Minister, and she put a 3-month delay into the project. It just adds uncertainty, which inevitably ultimately adds to cost, because uncertainty is expensive.
So at Sizewell, you've got A, B and C, possibly. A and B working?
No, A closed some time ago. That was one of our very first generation called Magnox stations. Sizewell B is our most modern nuclear station in the UK at the moment. It's what's called a pressurised water reactor, our only one of those, but Sizewell C and Hinkley C will also be of that broad design. Sizewell B we would expect to operate into the 2030s, if not longer. The earlier stations, the ones that are closing at the moment, have closed. Their life is limited because of technical factors to do with what they call the graphite in the middle. It degrades. But with the more modern water-cooled reactors, there's no real reason why their lifetime should be shortened. And there are those around the world now which have 80-year operating licences. So we may see Sizewell B operating well towards the middle of this decade. But all the other existing nuclear stations will be offline at the latest by around 2030, which is why we need to get going.
Well, we need to get going on this because, I mean, even if they get all the financing in place for Hinkley C and for Sizewell C, I mean, how long is it going to take to get them up and running? I mean, it's a very long process.
Yes, I mean, Sizewell C we're expecting Hinkley C we're expecting in 2026. That project is very well on. Across the world now, we're building nuclear stations in around 5 to 6 years, and the Hinkley project has been quite well managed. Of course, it hit the COVID problem, which slowed it down. And the great advantage of Sizewell C is, in effect, we'll just move the kit up from Somerset into Suffolk. They've got the direct experience of just having built 2 reactors there. And so one would expect this to be a much cheaper and quicker process because they've just done it once. And
what about the funding? Obviously, he's got the nod from Boris Johnson. However, what about international funding for all these sort of things?
Well, of course, when this was originally being discussed, it was Chinese money that was going to be important, and for a variety of reasons that we will understand. That's no longer the case. At Hinkley, the money had to be come up with up front, and that made it really rather expensive. For Sizewell, they're probably going to follow what's called a regulated asset-based model. That basically means that you can charge as you're building the plant, rather than having to wait till you start generating electricity for any income, which is very uncertain when you've got that amount of money requiring that amount of interest payments. Then if, say, you're halfway through the project, you can charge the electricity market half of what the output of the plant would be, and then you don't get long-term contracts at the end of it. Hinkley C has 35-year contracts at what, when it was priced, looked quite high prices. Actually, rather cheap today because of where power is today. It looks like a very good deal. And that should bring the overall cost of the project down, the long-term cost of the project down very significantly. And, of course, a lot of the risk then and the investment is to the electricity consumer rather than the government, which is attractive given the state of public finances.
Yeah, these modern reactors, the Cs, as it were, they're much smaller, aren't they?
Hinkley and Sizewell C aren't. They are very, very big. But at the same time, we are developing what they call small modular reactors, SMR. We haven't yet. There's a few prototypes now appearing around the world, and they do look very attractive. It's not an either-or. If you've got a big grid needing a lot of electricity, then the big centralised nuclear stations continue to make sense. But the advantage of the smaller ones is, firstly, they will be quicker and cheaper to build per unit, so the economic risk is not quite as high. It's easier to turn them on and off, if the small units rather than big units, to follow the load, because the big thing with electricity is we use about 3 times as much electricity at tea time on January the 25th as we do at 4 o'clock in the morning on July the 30th. And we need a system that can follow the load, the various loads during the day. Smaller modular reactors will be better at doing that. But I think the message coming out of what we've seen recently is that government, I think, probably does need to take a bigger role in planning a rational electricity system with a lot of different sources. If you just leave it to the market, then the market will do what the market thinks is best rather than what's in the long-term interests of the country. Now, sometimes those coincide, but I think energy we're seeing now is just so vital to everything we do that I think government does need to have a very central role in making sure that we have the right investment or a range of investments going in that will take us through whatever the future has to offer.